Causes, needs, and risks contributing toward aggression and violence among adult male offenders. Introduction. In South Africa, many contact crimes are associated with brutality and cruelty. This is often linked to gratuitous violence for no particular reason. It's a universal phenomenon affecting millions. When you look down to the root causes of this phenomenon, it can be linked to masculinity due to its relationship with offending, being reflected or deliberated upon by scholars. There are numerous factors that come into play when it comes to violence and aggression, being social aggression and violence, unequal access to services such as education, healthcare, social services, housing, employment, discrimination based on race, sex, and sexual orientation, and even disabilities. Continued exposure to violence or aggression from a childhood to adolescence negatively affects youth, particularly harmful for minority youth. Now, there's a clear distinction between aggression and violence when it comes to male offenders. One must be aware of it. Violence, it's a type of physical assault, while aggressive behavior, it's a much more broader concept. Other forms of intimidation, such as aggressive behavior verbally. Consequently, aggressive behavior does not necessarily need a physical component, implying the person does not need to use physical force. Any form of aggressive behavior will still translate into negative consequences. It deserves equal attention. Male youths and youths residing in low-income urban areas, in particular in South Africa, are subjected to high levels of violence and crime. This is mostly linked to illicit drugs and gangsterism. Numerous factors, such as exposure to traumatic experiences, PTSD, aggression, and substance abuse, are the main contributors. Methods and ethics, qualitative in nature, a collective case study research design with a focus on the causes, needs, and risks, ethical approval from the Department of Correctional Services, and it forms part of our offender assessment from a chronological perspective. I just want to explain there or give a bit more background, what we usually do. I also teach risk assessment and evaluation of offenders on fourth-year level, and link with our team students. We also try to involve them. So this module actually, or this initiative actually transpired from the module. So all the research, it goes back to the students. Participants completed one-on-one in their semi-structured interview schedule of about 90 minutes. It's not your conventional interview. It's actually an assessment. I would usually see a client, it depends on the circumstances and the complexity of the case. One client can take 1 to 3 sessions, sometimes up to 4 or 5. In the end, I selected 5 offenders from our pool to participate in this specific presentation. Theoretical framework. Life force persistent behavior, it does not happen overnight. Current behavior or past behavior determine future behavior. Moffat proposes a dual taxonomy of criminal behavior, which identified life force characteristics for offenders and adolescent limited offenders. It's distinctive, implying somewhere along the line, adolescent limited, some form of intervention had some form of impact. However, with life force persistent, it was far into adulthood. That's where the problem comes in. Unresolved issues. That implies a cycle of increased disadvantage characterized by early onset in antisocial and criminal behavior, which transpire further into adulthood, and this is linked to criminal associations. Key attributes would be early onset and persistence. They are reluctant to refrain from crime, either because of their circumstances or it becomes a custom. It's a norm of life. It's the only life they know. Overview of participants. As you can see, marginalized, all of them are African males. Of interest, when you look at the marital status, single, most of them. When it comes to the level of education, very low. Only one managed to complete school. Prior history, before incarceration, or prior occupation, sorry. Unemployed, One is a welder, meter taxi driver, unemployed, work for taxi association. The crimes and sentences imposed are quite varied. Car theft, hijackings, life sentence, gang affiliation. This client in particular was very interesting because I could not detect any from his file with exactly. He belonged to me also, I had no tattoos, so it still remains a mystery. Business robbery mostly in gang affiliation, life sentence for number 3. Number 4, business robbery and murder. This particular client is also linked, he was sought out, it's a new guy in the group. He got absorbed, business robbery went wrong. He killed the owner and the son, and at the end, he was actually sentenced for common purpose because he was there and the intention was to rob. Not necessarily to kill. Things went wrong. Worked for taxi association, murder 3 times, 70 years imprisonment. If you look at them, only one completed school, all of the participants, violent and aggressive crimes, including business robbery, murder stood out, illegal possession of ammunition, car theft, vehicle hijackings, and so forth. What's also important, within the South African context, we have a big problem with illegal weapon trade. It's quite common. Findings and discussion. The causes. Poverty, hardship, and unemployment. Participants 1 to 3, a life of hardship. Unemployed, no means, poverty, which directly translate into the statistics that we have currently. In unemployment among the youth in South Africa is as high as 60%. Limited education and scholastic achievements. We must also consider the quality of schooling. Most of the areas, poor quality of schooling, poor service delivery, poor infrastructure. Participants 1 to 3 and 5 with 4, with the exception of 4, completed school, never completed this schooling. Although we justified this due to constantly being transferred from one correctional setting to the next. However, it's also important to bear in mind that there are numerous factors when it comes to the transfer, and in the end, it's their choice if they want to study or not. Sorry. Poor personal intimate relationships and limited interpersonal skills. They lack total interpersonal skills due to the trauma that is suffered during the childhood. Participants 1, 4, and 5, poor relationship with others, a lack of interpersonal skill, especially when it comes to social learning. What they've learned in the parents, foster parents, the one, they opted to run away from home because they were too strict. This implies the participant was reluctant to abide the conventional norms. Very important and prevalent in South Africa, absent father. Majority of the participants, they had no father, was supposed to be the role model. This perception of father absence depicts a situation in which the child feels neglected. A longing, emotional longing, financial absence. They feel abandoned. This immediately plays a role when it comes to the pull and push and pull factors with regards to antisocial behavior, youth misbehavior, and criminal associations. Childhood trauma and exposure to violence. Most of them, with the exception of 2 and 5, indicated childhood trauma, especially physical abuse, very harsh punishment, there was some law, and child abuse remains prevalent in South Africa. Poor parent-child relationships. We also have a situation, parents go to work, they leave the child at home, they don't have the financial ability to have someone to look after the child at home. They are left at home, and this creates a pathway for criminality, depending on also the area where they stay. Participants 1 to 4 highlighted their association with negative peers, pro-criminal affiliations from as early as 11. 4 ran away from a caring home just because of their criminal lifestyle. Participant 3 was drawn, lifelong history with negative peers. That brings us to the conclusion that in modern society there persists a notion that violence is closely linked with masculinity. Aggression and violence are often apparent as a negative side of conventional masculine identities. Bullying and truancy. Participants 1 and 4, negative experience while attending school. Bullying may be interpreted differently. However, children who participate in this activity, they are more prone to bully others throughout their life into adulthood. Predisposition to and involvement in gang-related activities, except for participants 3 and 5, or the participants either in community or present gang connection. Participant 1 indicated that he was part of a syndicate specializing in the car theft and vehicle hijackings. 2 and 4, 28 gangs. When 28 gangs are very prevalent in South Africa, they are very violent. Interestingly, the majority of gang members initiated their antisocial career in early childhood, which implies they were exposed early to crime. Familial criminality. Participants the history of family criminality. 1, engaged in criminal activities with his twin brother. Persons exposed to a violent environment often share a cognitive landscape, shared values, norms, principles, which leads to aggressive activities and crime. Substance abuse. With the exceptions of participants 2 and 5, participant 1 abused alcohol and marijuana, while 3 and 4 indicated only marijuana. However, substance abuse remains a major causative factor in South Africa. When it comes to the risks, thing 2, early onset and history of childhood antisocial abusive behavior is picked up already at school, but somehow there's a miscommunication for events that transpire into late adolescence and into adulthood. That's a research area that also needs to be explored. With the exceptions of 3 and 5, violent career started early from the schooling years, implying that if it was identified, there could have been early intervention, which would have prevented a life force persistent pathway. Risk-taking behavior, very prevalent. All the participants engage in risk-taking behaviors, either prior to or during the commission of crimes, peer influence, substance abuse, gang involvement, and overall just a underpinning or inherent susceptibility to become aggressive and violent. That's their way of dealing with problems. Male peers contribute to the preserving and persistent modes of masculinity and risk-taking behavior, alcohol, drugs, and unsafe sex. Pro-criminal cognitive skills and poor emotion regulation. They find it difficult to regulate emotion. That's where therapy can also come in, but really striking with poor emotion regulation, very short-tempered. Participants 1 to 5 depicted pro-criminal tendencies, truancy, criminal associations, inadequate emotional regulation, such as a lack of responsibility and insight, propensity, low self-esteem can lead to aggressive and violent behavior. Poor coping and decision-making skills, very prevalent. All of them were susceptible, deviant to negative peer influence. They are just negative towards other and disrespectful. This also fuels the rivalry when it comes to gang wars. Detachment and lack of empathy. A lack of empathy is very prevalent. Empathy plays a prevalent role when it comes to interpersonal and societal roles, facilitating the exchange of experiences, needs, desires, whether they are personal, positive or negative, and still it endorses pro-social behavior. Lack of interpersonal relationships. 1 to 5 display problematic relationships with significant others. Poor parental and non-criminal attachments that only know the criminal lifestyle. Further infused by the stress of abandonment, absent father, being raised by extended family members, they feel like the excluded child, which makes them even more prone to find a sort of comfort with their gang affiliation or negative fears. Gang and criminal associations. There's a direct link between psychopathic personalities or personas and gang membership, a lack of empathy, high risk-taking behavior, further deteriorate within the gang membership structure. It's a matter of give and take. The more power I have, the more I can do to you. achieving a common purpose. Even if criminally motivated, they all have one purpose: commit crime, make a profit. Here I just gave you an overview of all the characteristics that actually came out from the sample. I could not touch all of them due to time constraints, but as you can see, it's quite worrisome when you look at the causes and areas, and some of them overlap, implying there's a huge need to address both collectively and not in isolation. Theme 3, sample-specific needs within the criminal justice system. Very important. Substance intervention programs. It remains a problem. It's under-serviced, under-resourced, and it should be interdisciplinary and evidence-based. Linked with policy. We have a problem in South Africa when it comes to implementation of policy. That's a big gap. In treatment for rehabilitation should be inclusive of short-term or long-term rehabilitation programs. It's very short, it's in short form. I am aware of there's actually a crisis now amongst the NGOs and NPOs offering these services, leaving youth at risk vulnerable. Both short and long-term programs run in success if they are implemented correctly. Skills empowerment, education remains key. It's a strategic influence given to them with the prospects we improve. This will also improve gender equity. It will strengthen the ability to secure job prospects, become economically stable, provide for the household. Therefore, implementing evidence-based school policies and programs to address aggression and violence should be our utmost priority, anticipated to help ease the achievement gap. We also see now an increase where there is significant violence perpetrated among school learners. It's serious issue of concern. Scholastic attainment is a link between exposure to and exposition of aggression and violence due to undesirable educational prospects. Here, once again, infrastructure, service delivery. This creates a causal pathway for aggression and violence obstructed. This is mostly due to frustration that can lead to aggression due to lost opportunities, perceived lost opportunities. This leads to truancy. Addressing masculinity norms, very important. From school, at home, churches, any form of social structures, it should become the norm where boys are motivated to challenge power and privilege related to them within acceptable prospects, implying notion of social inclusion and stigmatization of those that do not necessarily abide to robust ideas of masculinity, which implies if you don't comply to a certain norm, immediately the stigma kicks in. Gender socialization and masculinity ideologies among adolescent boys, very important. This will not only improve their own health and position into adulthood, but would also contribute to the health of women in class. We sit with a huge problem of gender-based violence, where women are raped and killed every few seconds. Theme 3, sample-specific needs, therapeutic interventions aimed at addressing trauma and PTSD. Very important. I'm not sure if all the correctional facilities have the resources to embed this within their policies. They are also under-resourced and staff are limited, and it also creates a notion that, for example, a social worker or psychologist can only spend X amount of time with a specific client. Emotion-focused therapy. Focus should be a safe environment where they can feel free and a report is established. Processing, empathetic consideration, and documentation. What exactly are the root causes of this behavior? Challenges experienced by the client, retelling traumatic events, exploring them and addressing them, reprocessing incomplete or interpersonal concerns, streamlining and changing of primary emotion scheme, the cognitive thinking patterns, for example, self-empowerment, self-esteem. Most of them that are violent only no violence as a means to bring forth a message. However, if you zoom in closely, very, very low self-esteem. The self-esteem is also can also be derived from experience of trauma and neglect in abandonment. Right. Okay, next slide. The limitations of the study and clinical research cannot be generalized. The specific sample only comprised of 5 adult offenders within the Gauteng province. Future research, something we really need to look at. Interventions aimed at addressing personality and cognitive functions of aggressive and violent offenders would be an exceptional interdisciplinary collaborative initiative. Strengthening violence prevention initiative among life force persistent offenders, needs-based approach in delivering rehabilitative services to aggressive and violent offenders.